Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Napkin Notes podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Evans. It's the first time I'm coming to you, one, solo in a long time, but two, with my short hair, very first time. We're still learning how to style it, but y'all, I'm in a new season of life. I'm in a new city. The cut we had to have known was coming. That's not true. Even I didn't know it was coming. I moved in silence on this one for sure. I didn't even tell my closest friends. And that is something in this season of life I've been doing a little bit more, is moving in silence. And that we call inner trust. I've just been trusting myself a bit more these days. I wrote about it on my Cheeky Chat Substack last week. I probably should have named it something a little bit easier to say. But I'm excited to be here with you guys today. I'm going to be diving into, again, solo, how I started my business in the first place. And this is not going to be a strategy. Well, there will be some strategy in here, but it's mostly just the story of how I went from being a data analyst in Virginia to moving to Nashville and becoming a podcast producer. This is a story I couldn't have written out myself if I had tried. And so there's so many small details in it that I wanted to give a short solo episode on it. Being in a new city, I found myself being asked the question, how do you start a podcast production agency, more than probably in the last few years. And so I was like, you know what? I don't know if I've sat down and talked about this before. Let's hop on the mic and let's chat about it, because one, it's just, there's so many moments that the Lord intervened that going back and telling the story has been, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not inspirational, but it's helpful to go back and tell your story in one sitting. And I tell people that come to me to work with me as a client to help tell their story as a guest on other people's podcasts. It's so helpful to tell your story in one sitting because you identify patterns, you identify times when the Lord showed up, you identify things that you actually want to continue with your life and continue to replicate that you don't always get if you don't tell it in one sitting. So I'm going to tell you how things got started, how I didn't plan this. I would say that I was definitely an accidental entrepreneur to begin with, but then how much resourcefulness had to kick in to keep things going. So let's go ahead and dive in, you guys. And so we're going to go and start back in 2018 after I had been in Nashville for 1 year. So it's Nashville, it's 2018. I've been there for about a year. When I first moved initially to Nashville, I still had my data analyst job. I was working fully remote. I'd always had in the back of my mind, like I always wonder if I could start a business. Now, the first part of this story I want to tell because I think it's important for people to hear that maybe think they want something more and they're feeling a desire for something more in their life, but they don't know what that more is yet. So the first part of this story is going to be for you. Because that was me. That's how I felt. I just knew that there was something else that I had a desire to be doing that would be more in alignment with my giftings and my passions. Because I know I've talked about this on previous podcasts, but my major in college, and that's only important just because of the stark contrast to what I do now, was economics, and I minored in math and statistics. And so it had nothing to do with podcasting or audio or truly anything creative. This is what I did to start to find, quote, my thing. And I kind of still eye roll at that because you guys have heard me talk about this too. I think we have different giftings, and I think that those are executed in different seasons differently according to how the Lord wants us to use those. So again, it's 2018, and my friend offered me tickets to something called Christy Wright's Business Boutique. If you live in Nashville, you'll know exactly what that is. But if not, I'll give you just a small bit of context. So Christy Wright used to be a personality or like a name under the Dave Ramsey umbrella. Dave Ramsey has his financial literacy, courses in teaching and radio show, and I'm sure that you know the name. So my friend offered me tickets to Christy Wright's Business Boutique, and Christy Wright spoke to women that wanted to start a business and help them get started. So it was very generous that my friend offered me this ticket. I obligingly accepted. But the funny thing about it was I didn't have a business idea. And I believe most women went with a business idea and then they would leave with how to actually execute it and how to start it. So I was already behind, and it was already a little bit random that I would go in the first place because I didn't have a business idea. But before I left, I thought, for this one-day conference, and it was in Lexington, Kentucky, which I learned is a different time zone than Nashville when I showed up an hour late. But I just thought, well, in case I make contacts with people, I should probably create a business card. So I get on Canva, as we do, which Canva has come so far since 2018, by the way. And I was like, let me make up some business cards. But to have a business card, you need to have a business. And so the only thing at that point in time that I thought I might be interested in was maybe coaching of some sort, specifically life coaching. I had started my master's degree at that point in time in professional mental health counseling, which I had to stop for other health reasons. That's another podcast. But I had completed also, so this is also part of that story, a health and nutrition life coaching course, maybe a year or two prior to that. The reason I had to stop the mental health counseling graduate degree was because of health and nutrition obstacles. And so that's why I had the coaching degree. So all of this to say, I was like, maybe I can do life coaching. So I create a business card. It's pink. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll put up what that initial card looked like. And it said Clarity Coach. What I thought I was helping people clarify, I don't know. But on the front, it said Clarity Coach. On the back, it said Elizabeth Evans. Put together my email and my phone number, and I showed up to this conference with these fake business cards for a business that I had no idea what it would be yet. So I get there, and there's different speakers throughout the day, and one of them was Donald Miller. Donald Miller, to me, at that point in time, he was a Christian author. I had read his books in college, Blue Like Jazz, a couple others. But when he got on stage that day, he was talking about this new business that he was starting called Story Brand. And again, if you live in Nashville, you're probably very familiar with it. But if not, Story Brand is a business that helps other businesses market their services. And as Donald Miller was going through the framework of Story Brand, I think there was 8 different elements to it, and it's called Story Brand because it would pick apart and dissect what makes of a good story and how you can use that framework to sell your services for your brand and your business. Now, I clung to this like glue. I can't describe how much his framework made so much sense to me in my head. So I left that day not being a clarity coach and not necessarily making a ton of business connections, but I found something that started to light my passions and my heart on fire, which was this framework that Don Miller had created. Now, I was trying to figure out why. Like, why did this resonate with me so much? Why did I like it so much? And so doing a little further digging, initially when Donald Miller started Story Brand, it was a framework for life coaches. But after they got into it about a year or two, I think this is the timeline that's accurate for his transition and transformation of Story Brand, they realized they were actually building a framework for businesses to market themselves, which is how it stands today. Now, the reason that I tell you this part of the story is because I did not become a life coach that day, but going into it thinking that life coaching might be what I wanted to do was an indicator as to why I connected so much with Donald Miller's framework, because initially it was for life coaches. So if you're not sure what you want to do next and you're trying to figure out what your thing is or your passion is or what you could create a business around or even just hobbies around, I think what you can take from that part of the story is just start showing up. I just showed up to a conference. I didn't know what I wanted to do going into it. I just knew that there was something more that I wanted. I could have left that day not having any more clarity than when I went in, and that would have also been okay. But when you're in this exploration phase of trying to figure out what your thing is, just start showing up, just start doing things. Find small pockets of time of things to research or to try out or ask people about. That to me was almost like my freshman year of college, when you sort of just try everything and you meet new people and you just show up. But the second thing is to hold loosely what the end result will look like when you're not really even at the starting line. Like when I went into that conference that day, I wasn't even I was behind the starting line. I was so much further behind what other people were doing that if I had wanted to come away with like a fully thought out business plan, I would have left very, very disappointed. But rather, from prompting to the Holy Spirit to go in the first place, I remember going to Lexington, Kentucky, getting halfway there and thinking, what am I doing? I don't have a business idea. I have these fake business cards. I felt so silly, but I knew that there was a prompting of the Holy Spirit to go that day. And so I think staying in the Word, staying close in your relationship with the Lord so that you can start to hear and see these things that overlap and to be obedient with these promptings and take action, I think is really, really important for this phase if you're still figuring it out. So 2 things: start showing up. And secondly, hold loosely what the end goal is before you're even at the starting line. And then like overarching over all of that is like really stay in tune with what the Lord is telling you, because you'll start to see some overlaps that I don't think you would I wouldn't have seen the life coaching overlap if I hadn't obviously shown up that day. So we'll fast forward a little bit. Now we're going to get into the actual podcasting element of it. So I ended up going to a StoryBrand conference, and that was really exciting for me because I was able to see that this marketing skill set of mine wasn't just something I thought I could do. I had a lot of tenured marketing professionals asking me for advice when I went on to, so this is going to be now my second conference, which is specifically StoryBrand related. I learned a lot. I learned how to market my marketing business, which is what I thought it was going to be at the time. And I took on a few beta test clients, which is something I highly, highly recommend when starting a business, is take on beta clients. I actually recommend do not charge them. Guidelines of my business is it's either free or it's full price. Discounting outside of like paying full discounts to me gets a little bit wishy-washy. So I took on 2 free beta test clients that I felt really passionate about. I talked a little bit about nutrition being a part of my story. I worked with the nutritionist that helped me partially overcome my Crohn's disease. And I worked with a friend I had met at the Urban Market, because we all know that I love the Urban Market, HERBAN, in Nashville, right outside Nashville in Franklin, Tennessee. Started to get my own process of onboarding, figuring out what to do from that point. So took on 2 beta clients. Then I took on my first actual client, and her name, she's so lovely, Deanne Bear. She is a painting artist based in Franklin, Tennessee. You guys have probably seen her iconic angel paintings. She paints other things as well, but I feel like I think there's a lion one that is also extremely popular. But I saw she was looking for some help with social media marketing, email copywriting, and a little bit of website design. I was like, I think I have enough of my own framework at this time to be able to help her across her digital footprint. And I was so nervous. Like, I wanted to do the best job that I could, but that was the first time that I put together a package, a price, a promise, and a process. And those are my 4 P's for starting a business. I had to get my package together. What was the price of that package? What was the process of implementing on that package? And what was the promise? Like, where was that client starting before working with me, and where would they end up after working with me? And so that was the first time I had ever done that before, but it provided more tangibles around this skill set of a little bit of design eye, a little bit of wordsmithing. I had also taken Marie Forleo's Copy Cure, which I highly recommend. So I started to basically stack these different skill sets of copywriting, design, a marketing framework that I was starting to piece together, and then offer it into a package. So let's get now into the podcast phase of what I was doing. So I was still working my 9 to 5 at this point. Let me check my phone because I wrote down all of the timeline details of all of these because this is really important. So the conference was in 2018. That was April. And then that client, Deanne, the painting artist I was just telling you about, that was August of 2018. And then I'm looking at my phone here because there was another part of the process that was important. So I hopped on an Instagram Live with Jasmine Starr when she was first starting. She has a social media business now, but I hopped on Instagram Live with her, and it was sort of an accident. She was taking Q&As from people, but you would actually be on a live with her. So you would, do your little request thing. I hit the request button to get on Instagram Live with her. She accepted me, which you would think I would have been far more prepared than I was. I had no makeup. I think I was in my pajamas. My hair was on top of my head. And I remember saying, oh my gosh, I didn't think you were going to pick me. And she goes, girl, you hit request. What'd you think was going to happen? And I was like, you're right. From then on, always be prepared, especially when you're putting yourself in a position to be prepared, or to be called upon. And so I was telling her a little bit, like, I'm working this 9 to 5. I'm starting to get a little bit of traction in a business on the side. What do you suggest I do here? And so at that point, we made basically a game plan of, once I made enough money, or once I made the same amount of money in my side hustle as my 9 to 5, is when I would quit and pull the plug. So having that promise in the back of my mind helped hold me accountable. So that was also, so I have August 15th was my kickoff with my first client. August 21st was my Instagram live with Jasmine. At the end of August, so this is now the part where we get into, okay, how does this parlay into podcasting? I was at the Urban Market. Again, I always spell it out, HERBAM, because the Urban Market it used to just be like a small coffee shop in Nashville, but now it's obviously much larger if you guys have been. But at that point in time, it was a place that I went to often. And the story is the catalyst to everything that I do today now. It was a Friday morning and in August 2018, and I didn't have makeup on. I didn't feel like I was going to be leaving the apartment that day. And I felt a nudge from Holy Spirit to go to the market. And I was like, no, like I don't, it's Friday. I don't have meetings. I'm not getting myself together. I do not plan on leaving my couch and my little office where I was working. Second time, nudge from Holy Spirit, go to the Urban Market, which at the time, it was not I went to the market every single day. So why the Lord was calling me to the market that day, I did not know why. A third time, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to be open to this. Lord, I feel like you're really telling me to go. I'm going to go begrudgingly. I'm just going to put on a baseball cap, no makeup, but I'm still going to go ahead and go. So I walk into the market and I go with my laptop, whole thing, baseball cap, no makeup. And one of the first people I see in there is actually a content creator that I had followed on Instagram for a while. She created Christian content. And her name is Jordan Dooley. You guys, if you remember following back in 2018, 2019 timeframe, we worked a lot together. We worked very closely on a lot of stuff. But I walked in and I see her. She and I had never met. And of course, she didn't even live in Nashville. But I was like, okay, Lord, if you've called me to the Urban Market at this specific time on this specific day to meet Jordan Dooley, you are going to have to make a way, because especially in Nashville, like, you just let people be. Like, you don't approach people, you let them live their lives. And I was like, I'm not going to approach Jordan. If you want me to talk to her, Lord, I am praying that you make a way. I put my stuff down, open up my laptop, and then I go get in line to get some food. So I'm in line behind Jordan, and I do not say anything to her. She orders, goes and sits down wherever she goes to sit down. I'm up next to order my food. Justin was working behind the counter that day. I ordered my food and he goes, hey, actually, the girl in front of you left her credit card at the cash register. And I was like, you know what? I would be more than glad to go give that back to her. So Justin was like, yeah, actually, that would be great. So the Lord answered that prayer very quickly. So I go back to where Jordan was and I hand her, I was like, hey, I think you left this at the front. Like, are you Jordan Dooley? It's the name on the card, which, like, obviously I knew. And she was like, yes. And then all of a sudden we just hit it off and started talking. And she asked what I did. I think I had my laptop maybe open on like what I was working on that day. And I told her what I was doing for Deanne, the painting artist. And we were doing different launches she had a new artwork series coming out. And Jordan said, as I was walking in today, I was praying that God would bring me somebody to help me strategize and launch my podcast. And so I was very honest. I was like, I've only helped launch physical products up until this point, but I am more than willing to try this out and see what we can do with your podcast. And so we strategized her launch. I have my phone up here to like look at my notes. That was August 2018, August 20th. And then her show launched October 17th, 2018. We activated a launch group. It was very organic. There were no paid ads. And Jordan is such a strong communicator. We launched her show to number 2 on what was iTunes back then, which is crazy to think about. So I continued working with Jordan. And then the next big milestone for me was June 2019. And that's when I met my second podcast client. Her name is Mallory Irvin, and she asked me to help strategize her show and her launch, and asked basically if I could do for her what I did for Jordan. And I was like, you know what? I have no idea, but I'm willing to try. Like, I didn't have enough historical data to say like, hey, this is a repeatable framework. I just was like, I just knew I had done it once. And so I helped her strategize, helped her launch, helped her, just do all the things that I was doing at that point in time with podcasting. And we also launched her to number 2 on iTunes. Now, keep in mind, I am still working my 9 to 5 at this point in time. So I am still clocking in, clocking out. But at this point, I have launched 2 top clients, 2 top podcasters in my free time. So from there, I did take on a couple more marketing clients. There was one just for marketing. It was a Christian music artist. July 2019, I get my first co-working office. July 2019, I create my first video for my website. Also July 2019, I start a new podcast with a client that I'd done marketing for. And then it was August 2019. So exactly a year to the day that I took on my very first client, was a podcast contract that, if accepted, I would make as much as I did in my 9 to 5. Which was where I would keep that promise to myself to leave my 9 to 5 job. She signed on. And then at the end of August 2019, I quit my 9 to 5. There's a couple of things in there that I find of utmost importance. One, of course, was being obedient to Holy Spirit to go to the urban market in the first place. There are so many parts of my story and in my business that I can only credit the Lord for. And what I'm so grateful for about that is my faith is so important to me, but the Lord has given me an opportunity to bring him up in so many conversations naturally and organically because of how integrated he was in my business journey. And I'm so grateful for that. I feel like it's a normal question to ask, like, how do you start a podcast production agency? And the fact that I can integrate the Lord and my faith in there so easily is really kind. Secondly, I think something I did really well in my business at first, because I was just giving you the highlights and the milestones, but when I tell you guys, I was working all the time. I was as scrappy as I possibly could be. I was trying to figure out the best way to serve my clients because I was obviously delivering results, but I think the hardest part when I got started was I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know what I was supposed to know. And I think that goes for any industry. And so that would be a big piece of advice for somebody that is just starting out, is start to figure out those guidelines pretty quickly, because it allowed me to know, like, if a client came back and asked a question about something, I could either say, I absolutely know that, or, hey, that's actually outside of scope of what I would do anyways. Like, I had no idea what should be in scope or out of scope. And it kept me in a very stressed state for a very long time when I was starting my business. And I think most new entrepreneurs and first-time business owners probably feel like that. So that would be a big piece of advice, is figure out what is the scope of what you should know and shouldn't know and where that starts and ends. And then thirdly, something that I figured out along the way as I was taking on these new podcast clients was, at that point in time, at least in the industry, people would have to hire an audio engineer. There wasn't a lot of video yet, so mostly an audio engineer, maybe a graphic designer, a copywriter, a strategist. They would have to hire all of these different people just to get a podcast out that probably wasn't going to make money for a long time anyways. And I saw a need in the industry to have a hub as a one-stop shop for all of those things. So essentially, all of those different skills I was telling you about at the beginning of the episode that I stacked is what I turned into an agency. And while that might be the norm now, that was not the norm in 2018, 2019, when podcasting was still figuring out what it was about to become, especially once 2020 hit. And then fourthly, something else I learned along the way, and this took me way longer to realize than it probably should have. But at the end of the day, in this industry, and perhaps if you're in an industry adjacent to this kind of creative personal brand type of industry, is people are hiring me for my taste and my vision, and learning from a service provider perspective where to input my direction and marrying it up with their brand was the goal. That was the service. That was the sweet spot. And so walking in as an authority in the room, but of course leaving the right amount of space for the brand owner to show up. That was the whole thing. But we offered that through social media. We offered that through recording and through guest research and obviously editing. Then we added in video, but I continued to see gaps in the market and how we could fill that and nail it and knock it out of the park for clients. And so that was 2019, and things have continued to grow and shift. But those were the big monumental milestones when I first started. That when people ask me, how did you get into this? That's what I say. I hope the first part of the story of even just getting to the conference is helpful for you if you're just still trying to figure out your thing. And I hope the second part provides people, I think, say success is the combination of luck meets opportunity. Is that how they say it? I would say it's more so where preparation meets the Lord's timing. I didn't know that when I went to the conference randomly in Lexington, Kentucky, that a handful of months later, I would turn that into a podcast production business. But I was prepping. I was putting in the time and the hours to get really good at copywriting, to get really good at storytelling, to get really good at strategizing launches. But I didn't know that doing that at a conference number 1 of Business Boutique would lead to conference number 2 of Story Brand, would lead to client number 1 of a painting artist, that would lead to podcast client number 1, that would then lead to podcast client probably 50 handful of years later. So do the work before it makes sense. You want that preparation for when the Lord presents you with the timing to move forward on it. And that's a word for me today too, because I feel like the industry is shifting. The services that I'm offering are shifting. And so I hope that's a word for you today, but it's certainly a word for me today, is to prepare before it makes sense. Get your house in order feels a little bit harsh, but I do think for this era of time too, that's probably wise words to heed. So I think that's about it for today, you guys. This was a very off the cuff, not planned episode to record today, but I hope it provides inspiration. I hope it provides scrappiness. I hope it provides you with the willingness and desire to go figure it out and to execute on the giftings that the Lord's put in your heart. So you guys, next week we'll be back to interview episodes, but for today, praying for you. Talk to you soon.